This is WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. You are listening to One Human Nation with your host, Sandy Batiste. This program will be talking about race and race relations in your community and nationally. Our goal is to be open, honest, and productive.
Welcome to the One Human Nation show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste. Thank you for listening in. The focus for this show is to create a safe, honest, open, and productive environment so we can all learn and share in our stories about race and hopefully move towards being one human nation. As a starter, let me start with just an initial disclaimer. The following program contains subject matter and realistic language that some listeners may find objectionable. Listener discretion is advised. So that doesn't mean that we are going to allow any profanity on the show. The viewpoints expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. So as we prepare for today's show, I do want to give some insight on how we're structured to keep you safe. This is a non-judgment environment. How to keep you honest when you share your story. We encourage you to share your truth using your I voice. Be open, but respectful and productive. So typically the format for the show is I interview our guest ahead of time so we're all on the same page. I don't want anyone to be blindsided as they come on the show. We do have a special guest that will be joining us at 5:15. So I want to share with you how you can share your story about race and your experiences. I encourage you to go to the website www.onehumannation.info. This is where you can be very productive in watching some of the videos, learning more insight about what we hope to share on the upcoming shows, the topics, and what is referred to as our reflective questions. And I do want to give a shout out to my friends that helped me on this journey, starting out with the One Human Race Initiative. And this is where we did workshops, and workshops still go on where they're face-to-face. So it's a little bit different in a radio format when we're trying to create a safe environment, protect privacy, but still be honest and open and productive. So as you listen to the show, we encourage you to send your story to this particular email address, mystory@onehumannation.info. Again, at any time that you are inspired and you want to share your story, that is going to be the way to connect. mystory@onehumannation.info. So when we start talking about the topics about race today, it's going to start with some very basic information. And that is, where did you first hear or learn about race? What environment were you in? Is it something that was discussed in the house, in your house as you were growing up? Is it something you learned about when you started going to school? Is it something that is talked about either positively or negatively around the holidays? So as you take a look at the website, www.onehumannation.info, there's a video clip there that we share with you. And we have a couple of documentary clips posted. So we use resources from documentaries so we can be productive, so we can have a base platform. And the series that's posted there, just the clips from the series, is the PBS series Race, The Power of Illusion. So we've got a couple of clips that are posted there. And then we also have a clip from a documentary that talks about more about some of the other more up-to-date documentaries that focus on our criminal justice system. So again, I encourage you to take a look at the website www.onehumannation.info and get a feel for where you are in your journey. This is not about judging. This is about you using your I voice. And just a little bit of information about me. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, attended public schools, and actually started in an integrated environment starting in the second grade. I am African American, and in second grade, my parents decided that I would attend a new school that was opening up close to the neighborhood. And so I was one of about 7 Black kids in my neighborhood that we were designated to start on this journey. And this was, 64, 65, the years of 64, 65, before integration in school was mandatory. It was voluntary. And so switching from the first grade, going to a school that was all African American, it was a long bus ride, and then switching in the second grade, I remember during the summer before attending second grade, we actually were gathered in a house with one of the other kids in the neighborhood. We all grew up together, and we were given the talk. And so the talk was about, you're going to be in a different environment in your next year in school, and you may hear things spoken to you derogatory. You may be called names. And the whole part of that conversation was to prepare us so that we would not be distracted by that. So the message that I got at a very early age, which was part of my internal culture for years and years and years, was, you know what? You just ignore anything that's derogatory being said about you, especially as it's related to the color of your skin, because there was nothing I can do about that. And my goal, my focus, my instructions from my parents, which were very clear, was that I was there to get an education. So some of you may have also had that experience. How many of you received the talk as African Americans in what to prepare for when things shifted a little in your world? Maybe you weren't invited to a party, a school party. Maybe there was a neighborhood event, something happening that you weren't allowed to attend or weren't invited to attend. These are the kinds of stories that you can share by going to the email address mystory@onehumannation.info. www.onehumannation.info. We do want to remind you that our communication agreement, even when you're emailing, I do require and request that you are respectful in your language. It's always helpful when you email to give a context. When did this occur? You don't have to remember the exact month that it happened, but to have an idea of what year. If you say, well, it was when I was in high school or when it was in elementary school, you'll probably get an email back from me that will say, well, what year was that? And this show is specifically focused on race relations in the United States of America. So because we have the advantage now, the technology with the internet, some people may be listening that are not in this country, but you might have grown up in the United States. And so you can still have a story to share, but it's not intended for someone that's living in another country that doesn't have a reference point for how things in the United States of America. Our whole focus on this show is to focus on what can we do to become one human nation. So there's a very simple way that we look at this journey, and it's a 3-part. I wish it was easy. I wish it wasn't painful, but there's 3 steps to looking at ourselves as one human nation, and it involves reconciliation, it involves healing, and it involves moving towards justice. And I know a lot of people, when I talk to them, I get the fact that we all just want to get along. We don't want to have that painful discussion. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to think about it. We want to think that, those things happened a long, long time ago. Those are not things that are happening now. Current events say differently. So when you take a look around, even if you think it's not directly impacting your world, it's indirectly impacting your world. So we want to be able to have a conversation where we can share in an environment that's safe, that there's not judgment, where you can be honest. Use your I voice. This is not about telling someone else's story. This is why we don't take calls live on the show. We basically, I do the interviews ahead of time because we want everyone to feel comfortable, to be open, but we also want it to be productive. And we feel like if we can share our stories, then there can be some change happening. There won't be the same cycle repeated over and over and over again. There's a part of me that wishes there was a vaccination that we could take to overcome looking at things from a race perspective. And I can honestly say I wish I didn't have to use words like race, words like African American or Black or Hispanic, Latino or Native American, because race as we know it has been created in this country. And so part of learning about how things were created, then it's a process of how do we dismantle it? How do we change it? How do we make a difference? How do we start impacting the next generation so they don't have to continuously go through this cycle and be shocked that someone would consider them to be subhuman? I have a friend of mine, and she's fond of saying, we're one human species. We're not a different species. We're one human being. There are not different species within the human race. But because of how we've created race, how race was created in this country, it served a purpose to create it. And that's the productivity part. Go take a look to the website, www.onehumannation.info, and take a look at some of the video clips. Start learning about our history because it is our history. It is not a Black history or white history. It is our history. And some of it is painful. As a matter of fact, a lot of it is painful. And we don't want to think about it. We want it all to go away. Or worse, we want to rewrite it so it's different and less painful, and the words are kinder. We don't like to use words like slavery and what that entailed. We don't like to think of what happened with the Native Americans that were already here when this country was supposedly discovered. So we want to get to the point on this show that we have an honest, safe, honest, open, and productive dialogue so we can move towards being one human nation. We're coming up on 5:15, so we're going to go to a break so that I can get our guest on the line, and she's going to share her story and with us. And remember to keep an open mind as you listen so we can be open to what we're hearing and learn from our stories. And some of our stories are going to be mutual and some of them are going to be different and unique, but it's your story without any judgment. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Lee, are you there?
I am.
Okay. So we want to start out some of the questions as far as our basis of starting this conversation is give us an idea, just a little bit of your background. Did you grow up in Savannah?
I did not grow up in Savannah. I actually grew up in Beaufort, South Carolina. I was born in Beaufort and lived there for about 7 years.
Okay.
And then we moved to Atlanta for a year, and then after that we moved to Savannah, and I have been in Savannah ever since then.
Okay. And for our listeners, and this is kind of, since the show is all about race and race relations, give us an idea about the neighborhood that you grew up in, or the environment that you grew up in. Did you hear conversations about race or anything in that world as you were going to school? Any names that you were referred to as? Because I do want the listeners to know that you are an African American, so just for a point of clarification. But any of that comes to mind to you as far as when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up in a trailer park in Beaufort, South Carolina. I grew up in Grays Hill, and there were probably 6 or 7 trailers in our trailer park. And I always tell people I grew up in white culture. So that meant that all my friends were white. In kindergarten, I went to a school, and all the students were white except for my family. Like my cousins went to school there. And so I grew up in white culture. So that meant that, I knew how to, talk. They always said as I was growing up, they're like, oh, you talk white, And so, but I grew up, we didn't really talk about race. We talked about, they would do things like, oh, can I touch your hair? Or, they would touch your skin or something like that. But when I was younger, I didn't equate that to race or being different.
Okay.
At the time. So, yeah, I grew up in a very interesting neighborhood. And believe it or not, the neighborhood I grew up in was the same people I went to church with. So,
okay.
Yeah, so I saw the same people all the time. And, and it was kind of like a family. And race didn't really come to mind when I was younger at 6 years old.
Right. So would you say that everybody then that you were at this stage growing up with were in the same economic status?
Yes, we were all in the same economic status, which was usually mom stayed home and dad worked. So it was a single income household.
Okay.
Yeah. And, my personal family, like my dad, did not graduate from college. And so, he, throughout the years, went up the ranks, and so proud of my dad. But when we were younger, he worked as a garbage guy. And so that was our single family income growing up. And to be honest, when I was growing up, I didn't see myself as poor.
Right.
I was just content.
Right. Yeah. A happy childhood. I totally get that. Exactly. So kind of fast forward after 6 years old and you were did you transition into public school, or how did your education, when you moved to Atlanta, how did things change?
So when I moved to Atlanta, actually, my mom homeschooled me, and I stayed, I graduated in the 11th grade. I was homeschooled all the way through. So basically from first grade all the way through 11th grade, I was homeschooled.
Okay. And give us an idea of what timeline that was. What year, what were the years that you were homeschooled, in just a broad range? Because I know from knowing you that when you were going through homeschooling, it was not the popular thing. It was not.
No, it was not. And as a matter of fact, it was probably 97 to about 2006. I think that's about right. And no, it was not popular. Really, it wasn't until I was getting ready to graduate that it started to become popular. So, and we didn't really hang out with people outside of our church or homeschool group, so I was never really ridiculed for it.
Okay.
But yeah, it definitely was not popular during that time frame.
Okay. And so then you went to college, and what was that experience like?
Wow, I did. And when I got to college, I still, I grew up in white culture. So even in college, people would say, oh my gosh, you talk white, or why are you talking like that? And in my mind, I'm thinking, what are you even talking about? Like, I'm just talking like me. And again, race really did not even cross my mind. That came a little bit later, but I still got that in college. But I had a great college experience, and I graduated in 4 years. But yeah, I still had that thing of, why do you talk like that? Or you dress like that? Or, how do you know these things? Type conversations happened in college.
Okay. And socializing in college, what was that like? Did you have a preference as far as the dating part of it? Because I know you and I have talked about this off the air, kind of. What was that experience like for you in college?
Well, it's interesting because being homeschooled, you don't really fraternize with a lot of other people. And I was a weightlifter all the way from middle school all the way through college. And so I had friends from there. But when I got to college, I met a guy in my program, and we dated for a little over a year. And, to be honest, it wasn't, I can't say that it was a terrible experience or a bad experience. Like, I can't compare it to someone who, did grow up around other people and grew up dating. But it didn't feel abnormal, I'll say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you were in college, during this time dating, did you date someone that was African American? Did you date someone that was white or a different ethnic group?
I did. I actually dated, which is interesting enough. I dated a white guy in college, and I dated him for, like I said, a little over a year.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a great experience. I didn't have a preference. I didn't come in saying, oh, I only date white guys, I only date black guys. It's just we were both attracted to each other, and, it kind of went from there.
Okay. And as that relationship developed, how did your family feel about that?
Ooh, so that was not widely popular in my family. I dated a white guy. It actually kind of drove a wedge between my mother and I, and my dad didn't really care. My dad's from up north, and so, that wasn't foreign to him or, but as far as our social circle goes, everyone was very accepting of us, and, we all had the same friends, and so we always hung out with each other. And it was weird. I remember going to Disney one time, and, we were kind of walking around, and we're going, wow, there's a lot of mixed couples down here. Like, this is so interesting, because here, in the South where we live, at the time we were dating, we didn't really see that much, and you still got the weird looks and the kind of the whispers and things, but it didn't really bother either one of us, and we never really discussed it, to be honest.
Okay, so, and just for a reference as far as the time period, was this like within the past 5 years or 6 years or?
It was actually, I would say, about 8 years ago.
8 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
And fast forwarding, did that relationship continue, or what was the breaking point?
It did not continue. We kind of just went our separate ways right after near graduation. We were, I wanted to do something different than he wanted to do, and he wanted to move away, and I didn't really want to leave my family. So we went our separate ways, and it was kind of a mutual separation. We still talk to each other. But fast forward to now, I met my husband at the butt end of college. I mean, like right before I graduated, I met my husband, and he is African American. And like I said, while I was dating, I had no racial preference. Like that never crossed my mind. But we were crazy attracted to each other, and so we got married. Let's see, it'll be 4 years. Very soon.
Okay, so I'm assuming since you guys got married that was a more acceptable relationship for your family.
Oh yes, we still laugh. We still laugh about it today. It was like I brought him home, and my parents were like, "Oh, you're black. Welcome." That's how that went over.
That's
It was
how that went.
immediately accepted. It's funny because, then after they were like, okay, what kind of guy is he? But it was, oh, he's black? Okay, welcome, come on in. Now let's talk. We still laugh about that today.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Leah. So based on that, would you have a different approach in talking to your children? Would you give them that, because when I was growing up, I literally got the talk. I got the talk of course, it was a different time, and I'm hoping that was because it was a different time. I'm a lot more mature than you are, so I'm hoping that because of the time period, things, that's what happened at that time. My parents and the other parents did not want us to be shocked or be placed in an environment that would create harm. But it was clear to us, it was made very clear to us that we were there to get an education. That was the purpose.
Right.
That's what we were there for. So would you have any kind of different conversation with your family as you're starting a family?
My husband and I talk about this now. We have a 2-year-old little girl, and he's kind of like, there's so many awesome things you can do, entrepreneurship, and college is not the end all be all. And so that's kind of the conversation we're going to have with our daughter is, college is not the end all be all, but however, make sure the conversation, growing up I had it was, you need to get married first before you do anything. Like that's how I grew up. It was very religious based. You're to be a mother and stay home and raise. But then as we got older, my parents realized that, going off to college is a great thing. And so they very much encouraged me to do that. And I'm going to do the same for my daughter. Make sure you do what you love, do what you want to do, do the right thing. And we won't have a preference, does he treat you well? Does he love you? Those are the most important things.
Okay.
And I hope you always say what you're going to do. My daughter's 2. I don't know what's going to happen or what she's going to do or not want to do, but we hope to instill in her some of the values, even some of the values my parents instilled in me. Make sure you're wise in your choices, and
somebody
make sure you're aware.
Right. Okay, So I know you took the opportunity to take a look at the website for www.onehumannation.info to prep just for this conversation. And there was the video there that was posted about, race and race not being biological. And so it looks like you definitely embraced that growing up. That I don't want to use the term that you were colorblind, but it was a case of that was not something that impacted your world until you got to be an adult, until later. It was kind of like the world kind of crushing in on you as opposed to the other way around.
Right. Yeah. And I grew up in a very interesting culture. Like I said, I went to church with white culture. I went to everything, school. And so I didn't grow up in my own personal, like the black culture. And so I got to experience the other side. I got to hear what they had to say. I got to see how they live, so I think that was a plus for me.
Okay.
In doing that. And it's interesting as I got older, now where I work as a diversity coordinator, I get to almost bridge the gap between, bridge the gap between, the white people say this and the black people do this. And it's like, well, no, that's just a misunderstanding. So it's nice to have been raised in that culture to be able to, kind of bridge that gap between the two and get rid of some of those myths of DNA and, that stuff is not scientific.
Right.
It's a myth, it's a misconception.
Right.
So that's been a really great journey for me, I think.
You do
the way
have,
I was raised.
yes, you do have an interesting story. And what would be interesting for me is if you did go, I don't know if you've already done this previously, Leah. There's a link on the website for the implicit association test.
Yes, and I have done that. I've done a few of them. I love them.
Okay, cool. So, and I encourage the listeners to also do that and just kind of see where you have a preference as it relates to race, if at all. Leah, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I really appreciate you calling in because I know you've got a meeting to get into, and I definitely appreciate you taking the time to share your story on One Human Nation.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All righty. Take care.
All right, take care.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And I do appreciate the honesty and the openness of sharing the story, because that's what we want to have happen with the One Human Nation show. We want everyone to feel like they are safe, that they can be honest, that we can have an open and productive conversation. So there is that opportunity that you can also share your story on the air, but I do talk to you before you actually get to that point. So probably the easiest way to connect with me is at my story at onehumannation.info. So you can email your story to mystory@onehumannation.info. And we're going to take a couple of minutes to do some announcements, and thank you for listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global sound.
This portion of WRUU LP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by a grant from Sentient Bean, offering fair trade coffee, vegan and vegetarian food, and breakfast all day. Located at 13 East Park Avenue, across the street from the tennis courts at Forsyth Park. Our menu and special events listings can be found at sentientbean.com.
To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU. We're going to take a short music break, and we'll be back with the One Human Nation show. am your host, Sandy Batiste, and we were talking about what are your initial recollections about race as you were growing up. And it may be a difference depending on whether you grew up in the South or did you grow up with people that were in the same economic status? Did you grow up in a household where race wasn't really anything discussed? Our guest today had a very unique situation because the people she actually grew up with at a very young age were also the people that she was going to church with. And so my experience, because what we want you to do on the One Human Nation show is share your story using your truth, using your I voice. We don't want to have any fake news, so we want to make sure that we are really following our premise of being honest. So when I was growing up, the neighborhood that I grew up in was not diverse. It was predominantly African American. It was considered, and still is, the south side of Savannah, and very much considered to be rural at the time that I grew up. So I went to a church where everyone was also African American. It was the same church that my parents were members of, and, we were members of, and it was just, that's how we did it. There was not any diversity in that type of environment. So the first experience that I had was really in second grade. And it's a different world when you're put into that environment. It wasn't really anything that you thought about. It wasn't anything I thought about. It wasn't something that I had a difference of opinion with my parents on. It wasn't really anything that we thought about. It was just, that was just what was going to happen. And what I recall from that, in going from a predominantly black school to a predominantly white school, I can remember the school being new. I can remember the new books. I can remember new desks. I do remember some of the names that were used, the bus that we rode onto the school. There were different times. It's in predominantly the population on that bus was white, so there was very few black kids. And then at some point in time, that kind of shifted later. And I think that was at the time when integration became mandatory instead of voluntary. So I would love for you to share your stories, and it could be a different story because it is your story. And the way you will share that story, the easiest way to connect with me is by sending an email to mystory@onehumannation.info. Again, that email address is mystory@onehumannation.info. I do want to bring your attention to another topic that we're going to be talking about in next week's show, and it's talking about what kind of role did, and I hate to use this term, government play in developing the housing market. What kind of advantages were given or different programs that were allowed. And there is a clip that's posted on onehumannation.info, and it's called The Story We Tell. And it gives a really good insight into when some of the housing programs that were started, and you may be familiar with what's referred to as FHA, a Federal Housing Administration program. That program has been around for quite some time. It started in the 30s. So I would recommend and invite you to listen to that clip, watch that clip when you get the opportunity to be stationary, and take a few minutes to take a look at that and see what impact has that had on how we've developed as a nation. It would have been a wonderful opportunity to start bridging the gap. But at this point in time in our history, it was definitely a divisive stance that the government took in creating some of these programs that exclusively prohibited domestic workers, which were primarily African American, from participating in these types of programs. So, as you think about and reflect on the next couple of days and what your point of reference is going to be, and as you look at the people you engage in at work, is there something being said? Is there some part of the culture there in that environment that needs to change? And the question is, are you comfortable in being a part of that change? Has something been said, done? As you go shopping, as you take a look around, and we have, for those of us that are in this particular doctrine of Christianity, it's a huge season of the Easter season. So take a look on Sundays, on that church day that is in some ways one of the most segregated days in this country. So take a look around and see if you see other people that look like you. Is it anything that tweaks an interest for you to continue on your journey about race and discovering about race, so that we can move towards being one human nation? And once again, you can send your information in to me at mystory@onehumannation.info. As a reminder, we do want to encourage you that everyone is at a different place on their journey of understanding the idea of race in this country. This is not a show that we expect anyone to be an expert on the subject matter. We don't expect anyone to say, well, I've gone to school for this and I can talk about this, because it's your individual story. We're here to listen and to learn. And keep in mind, you may have an emotional reaction to something you view. You may be experiencing something similar to what our guests experience. You may be at that point right now in trying to make some decisions. And so it can be very emotional. So take care of yourself. Try to stay engaged with the radio show, stay engaged and supportive, and take care of yourself as we continue to learn about how this concept of race and the history of the development of institutional systemic racism impacts our community, whether it's the local community of Savannah or it's the community that you live in, because I know I've got listeners that are in other parts of the country. What kind of community do we want to build as we move towards one human nation? And keep in mind that your anonymity is protected. You don't have to go on the air the way Leah did to talk about her story. You can keep your story private by sending an email, and I won't publish your name and say, well, this was sent to me by this particular person. The whole purpose of that email communication is to give you the opportunity to tell your story. And if from that, when we connect, you decide that you do want to go on the air to share your story, you can do that. You can have that option. Keeping in mind that we do want to be respectful of our listeners. We want to make sure that our language is appropriate and kid-friendly, although I hesitate to say kid-friendly based on some of the things that I hear coming into some of the media now. But we do want to be respectful of everyone that's going to be listening to the information that we're putting out there for the One Human Nation show. Keep in mind that you can listen to us on Thursdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and this is weekly that we will be engaging in conversations that can be very difficult about race, and we're going to use terms that identify, even though I hate to say the word race because it's something that was engineered, and do remember that the viewpoints expressed in this program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. And any viewpoints that you may disagree with are not the opinions of WRUU. We're going to get ready for our next host coming up. Sound Limit with Troy Stoner is going to be coming up at the top of the hour. Thank you for listening to the One Human Nation show.